When the white smoke rose over St. Peter's Square, few knew the full story behind the name they were hearing. Pope Leo XIV. But those who did knew they weren't just welcoming a new pontiff. They were welcoming a man whose life already told a global story, one that transcended flags and borders. At number 10 in this journey of surprising truths, dual citizenship. Leo XIV, born Robert Francis Prevost in the city of Chicago, carries not one, but two nations within him, American by birth and Peruvian by choice. While many see nationality as a matter of paperwork or passport stamps, for him, it became a symbol of love, belonging, and mission. Growing up in the urban heart of Chicago in 1955, Robert Prevost was surrounded by Catholic tradition, immigrant stories, and the kind of street-level challenges that shape resilient souls. His neighborhood reflected a mosaic of cultures where hard work, family, and faith were not just values, but necessities. But it wasn't until his missionary work in Peru that his vocation found its deepest roots. As a young Augustinian priest in the 1980s, he arrived in the heart of a country torn by unrest, violence, and poverty. The scars left by political instability and guerrilla warfare weren't abstract headlines for him, they were the faces of the people he served. In dusty villages and mountain communities, he didn't just preach. He listened. He learned their language, their customs, their wounds. In time, the people didn't see him as an outsider, they saw him as one of their own. And he, in turn, made it official. He requested Peruvian citizenship not for status, but as a declaration of unity. His priesthood wasn't American or Peruvian. It was both. It was universal. It was Catholic in the truest sense of the word. And now, standing at the head of a global church, his identity built between Chicago and Chulucanas, between English and Quechua, speaks volumes. It reminds the world that the Catholic Church doesn't belong to one continent or culture, it belongs to all. His very life is proof. And yet, beneath the layers of mission and theology, there's a human side that often goes unnoticed. That brings us to number 9. His quiet passion for tennis. Yes, before the vestments, before the Vatican, there was a young man with a tennis racket, finding peace and discipline between the chalked lines of a court. From his early years in Chicago to his time serving in Latin America, Robert Prevost never quite gave up the game. It was more than just exercise, it was therapy. A sacred rhythm of movement, reflection, and humility. Colleagues and friends recall how he would organize spontaneous matches with youth in Peru, laughing and sweating side by side, not from behind a podium, but across a net. There were no sermons, just shared moments. In those matches, he taught without speaking. He showed up as a brother, not just a leader. And the lessons he drew from the court, they stayed with him. In one interview, he said tennis had taught him to wait for the right moment, to listen more than he spoke, and to keep going even after a bad set. Victory was never the goal, it was the discipline, the perseverance, the grace in motion that mattered. That's why this seemingly trivial fact reveals something profound. In a world where spiritual authority is often wrapped in formality, Pope Leo XIV offers something different. Approachability, simplicity, strength without spectacle. His leadership isn't built on declarations alone, but on lived experience, shared laughter, and the quiet strength of someone who has learned how to win and lose with grace. As he steps into the highest office of the church, the image of him with a racket in hand may seem out of place. But maybe that's the point. Because sometimes, it's in the smallest details that we find the biggest truths. And in this case, the man who now wears white once found balance, humility, and humanity in the game of tennis. Just as he now seeks to bring those same virtues to the church and the world. Among the many qualities that define Pope Leo XIV, one shines with particular brilliance in our globalized and diverse world: his gift for language. Coming in at number 8, we explore not just a list of dialects, but a deeper calling, the rare ability to speak across cultures, with authenticity and heart. More than just fluency, Pope Leo XIV speaks to connect, not to impress. From English to Spanish, Italian to French, and even through the ancient cadence of Latin or the warmth of Portuguese, his words don't just cross borders, they build bridges. This linguistic fluency isn't some polished political tool or ceremonial skill. It's something far more intimate. It is the result of decades spent shoulder to shoulder with the people he served, from crowded Roman corridors to remote Andean villages. In Peru, where he ministered for many years, he chose not to rely on translators. Instead, he embraced the language of the people, directly learning it, loving it, and letting it reshape him. To speak to someone in their own tongue is to touch their soul without walls. That's what he did again and again. But this goes beyond communication. Pope Leo XIV understands something deeply human. That language is more than words, it's memory, emotion, identity. When he spoke Quechua with indigenous communities in the mountains of northern Peru, he wasn't just preaching the gospel, he was living it. He met people in their own rhythm, respecting their stories, honoring their culture, allowing their voices to shape the shared space between them. Inside the Vatican, this ability to navigate between worlds became one of his greatest strengths. When cultural misunderstandings threatened unity, he acted as a quiet peacemaker, not by imposing solutions, but by listening, translating, clarifying. In synods and private meetings, it was often his voice that helped different corners of the church hear one another more clearly. His linguistic reach became a pastoral gift. And now, as pontiff, that gift feels more urgent than ever. In an era marked by division, by rising noise and narrowing attention spans, he reminds us that dialogue isn't just helpful, it's essential. His voice, shaped by so many tongues, mirrors a church that longs to listen deeply and speak truthfully to all corners of the earth. And in that voice, we don't just hear a leader. We hear a shepherd fluent in the languages of love, dignity, and peace. Number 7 on our journey into the life of this unexpected pope reveals something more lighthearted, but no less meaningful. He's a lifelong Chicago White Sox fan. Yes, you heard that right. Imagine the successor of St. Peter adjusting his papal robes while recalling a nail-biting ninth inning. For Pope Leo XIV, baseball wasn't just a childhood hobby. It was part of the fabric of his life. His loyalty to the White Sox is more than a quirky fact, it's a thread woven through his upbringing on the gritty south side of Chicago, where ethnic communities lived shoulder to shoulder, and sports were more than entertainment, they were identity, bonding, and hope. The White Sox, a team familiar with long droughts and hard-fought comebacks, taught young Robert lessons that books could not. How to lose gracefully. How to wait. How to cheer not because your team is perfect, but because it's yours. Even as his path took him far from the stadium lights, first to Peru, then to Rome, his connection to the team never faded. Friends and fellow clergy recount moments when he would light up at the mere mention of a game. In casual moments with youth, he would sometimes show up wearing a Sox cap or jersey, a quiet reminder of where he came from and what still made him smile. And that's the heart of it. In a world where spiritual figures can feel distant, almost untouchable, he remains grounded. Human. Real. His affection for a team known for its grit and perseverance isn't a trivial anecdote, it's a glimpse into his soul. Into a man who knows that loyalty isn't earned only in easy seasons. It's forged in droughts, in disappointments, in hope that keeps showing up. And perhaps that's what makes this so powerful. In a time when many feel disconnected from faith, from church, or from leadership, Pope Leo XIV reminds us that holiness doesn't mean detachment. That to love Christ is not to unlove the world, but to carry it with you, even in the form of a baseball cap tucked into your suitcase. His papacy may be rooted in the eternal, but it is also marked by moments that are wonderfully, unmistakably human. Number 6 on our unfolding journey into the life of Pope Leo XIV brings us to a chapter that not only defined his path, but transformed him forever. It began quietly, without applause or cameras, in the dusty hills of northern Peru. In the mid-980s, long before the world would know his name, a young Augustinian priest named Robert Prevost was sent as a missionary to one of the most neglected corners of the world, the prelature of Chulucanas. It was a place many had forgotten, a region defined not by headlines or history books, but by long, winding roads, communities without running water, and a resilience forged in poverty. What he found there wasn't comfort. It wasn't ease. But it was real. And he didn't arrive as a foreign savior, he arrived as a brother. He walked beside the people, not in front of them. He learned their rhythms, their fears, and their hopes. He sat with them not as a distant observer, but as a guest at their tables, eating their bread, speaking their language, honoring their traditions. In time, he would not only become fluent in Spanish, but also immerse himself in the local dialects and Andean expressions that could never be found in textbooks, only in hearts. His mission was not defined by ceremony. It was not limited to vestments and rituals. It was built in the mud walls of rural schoolhouses he helped build, in the noisy clatter of community workshops he organized, in the quiet but firm voice he offered in moments of social tension. He became, day by day, not a visitor, but a presence. Someone who could be counted on when the government could not. Someone who brought not only the Eucharist, but also first aid supplies, bandages, clean water, and words that soothed aching souls. People still recall the image of him trekking for hours under the sun, his shoes covered in dust, carrying nothing but a small bag, a Bible, and unwavering purpose. They remember the man who refused to turn away from the hard places. The man who would sit for hours beside the sick, the widowed, the abandoned. The man who didn't just bring God's word, but embodied it. His witness was so powerful, so persistent, that in time, those same people who first knew him as Padre Roberto would kneel before him as their bishop. Not a stranger wearing robes, but a brother raised up among them, now shepherding the same flock he once walked alongside in anonymity. That chapter, those decades in Peru, did not just shape his theology. They shaped his soul. They gave birth to a vision of the church that was not academic, not abstract. It was rooted in the ground. A church that doesn't lead from balconies, but walks in bare feet through unpaved roads. A church that listens before it speaks, and bleeds before it judges. His election to the papacy isn't a sudden rise. It's the fruit of seeds planted in silence, grown among the humble, and harvested in the hearts of the forgotten. And it is from that soil that we reach number 5, a nickname that says more than most titles ever could. Father Bob. It may sound simple, almost too informal for someone who would one day lead over 1 billion faithful. But to the thousands who knew him in the hills and barrios of Peru, Father Bob was never just a name. It was affection. It was trust. It was love. It was the voice people called out when they were in need, and the name children whispered when they saw him walking into town with his signature smile. Unlike so many who wear clerical collars, he never carried an air of detachment. He didn't build walls of reverence between himself and the people. Instead, he built bridges with his presence. Whether it was joining in song during village celebrations or sitting quietly by a dying elder's side, his ministry was not one of appearances. It was one of immersion, one of presence, one of shared humanity. He didn't insist on formality. He welcomed familiarity. Even with his unmistakable American accent, he learned to laugh at his own mistakes in Spanish, never offended by correction, always eager to understand. His humility disarmed skepticism. His consistency turned curiosity into trust. The people didn't just respect him, they loved him. They welcomed him into their homes, into their lives, into their stories. And he stayed. Not for a season, but for years. Not as a guest, but as family. Even when he was later elevated to bishop, and eventually brought to Rome, those who knew him best never stopped calling him Father Bob. Because the title wasn't about status, it was about relationship. About a man who saw his vocation not as authority, but as accompaniment. Not as power, but as service. He may now sit upon the chair of St. Peter. But that old nickname, still whispered with warmth in the villages of Peru, reminds us of the essence of his ministry. He never chased prestige. He chose people. He never spoke from above. He listened from beside. And in a world that often forgets the power of that kind of presence, Pope Leo XIV offers a quiet, unwavering reminder. Before he was Pope, before he was Bishop, he was simply Father Bob. And that may be the most powerful title of them all. At number 4, we uncover a defining chapter that quietly shaped the leadership style of Pope Leo XIV long before his name ever echoed through St. Peter's Square. Years before he would wear white or walk the marble halls of the Vatican, Robert Francis Prevost, still known affectionately as Father Bob, was entrusted with one of the most demanding responsibilities in religious life: leading the global order of St. Augustine. It was the year 2001 when the worldwide Augustinian community elected him Prior General, a role that would place him at the helm of a religious family stretching across more than 40 countries. Founded in the 13th century, the Augustinians carry a profound legacy of study, prayer, and community life. But the task of leading such a diverse body in the face of modern pressures required more than tradition. It demanded vision, humility, and a heart attuned to both the ancient and the emerging. For 12 full years, Father Bob guided this international order not from a pedestal, but from a posture of service. From the very beginning, his leadership was marked by listening, not commanding. He chose not to remain behind a desk in Rome, but instead traveled tirelessly to visit Augustinian communities in Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Europe. Whether it was a remote convent in the Philippines or a bustling mission in Nigeria, he preferred to be there in person to sit with the brothers, to hear their concerns, to pray in their chapels, and to witness their daily lives firsthand. Under his care, the order didn't retreat from the world, it re-engaged with it. He prioritized formation programs that deepened spiritual life. He encouraged vocations in parts of the world often overlooked. And he approached structural reforms not as disruptions, but as opportunities to renew fidelity to the order's core charism. He neither clung to the past nor rushed into novelty. He walked the line between tradition and change with balance, with pastoral sensitivity, and with a rare steadiness. That time in leadership quietly prepared him for something far greater. In those years, he wasn't just managing logistics or directing communities, he was learning how to govern a global body of believers. He was learning how to guide without control, how to lead with compassion, and how to build trust across cultures, languages, and generations. In those years, a foundation was laid. And though no one could see it yet, it was the steady preparation for the moment when he would one day be called to guide the bark of Peter itself with the same wisdom, the same patience, and the same quiet strength he had already proven. But to understand the man behind the title, we must step further back to the beginning. At number 3, we return to his origins, to the streets that shaped him before the priesthood, before Peru, before Rome. We return to the south side of Chicago. It was there, in 1955, that Robert Francis Prevost was born into a working-class Catholic family in one of America's most culturally rich and socially complex neighborhoods. The south side of Chicago was more than just a backdrop. It was a crucible. It was where Italian, Polish, Irish, African American, and Latino families built lives side by side amidst factories, parishes, modest homes, and the unspoken bond of shared struggle. In that atmosphere, faith was not an abstract idea, it was daily bread. It was resilience. It was survival. From a young age, he was steeped in a world where the church wasn't an institution, it was a second home. He served as an altar boy, attended Mass almost daily, and found in the rituals of the liturgy a quiet call beginning to stir. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand. It was the steady whisper of vocation echoing from the pews, the sacristy, the simple stone altar. In those early years, he didn't dream of the Vatican. He dreamed of serving, of giving, of living the gospel in the place where it was most needed. That neighborhood didn't just give him a sense of calling. It gave him a backbone. It taught him the value of hard work, the dignity of labor, and the sacredness of community. He saw inequality. He saw families struggle. And he saw how faith helped them carry burdens too heavy for one person alone. That environment forged not only his compassion but his courage. His priesthood, decades later, would always remain grounded in those early lessons. And now, when the world sees Pope Leo XIV, they may see a man of global experience, of intellectual depth, of pastoral wisdom. But at the core remains the boy from Chicago, shaped by streets that taught him how to listen, how to persevere, and how to pray when the lights are low and the answers are few. At number 2, we arrive at one of the most surprising turns in this journey, his election as Pope. In a time when the Church seemed fractured by theological tension, geographic divisions, and the loud demands of a world asking hard questions, many assumed the next conclave would stretch for days, even weeks. The media prepared for drama. Analysts predicted factions. But inside the Sistine Chapel, something else happened. Something quieter. Something faster. In just a short span of time, the College of Cardinals reached an overwhelming consensus. There were no lengthy standoffs, no visible fractures. Instead, there was clarity. A man had emerged not because he sought power, but because he had lived service. Robert Francis Prevost was chosen swiftly, peacefully, and with the kind of unity that caught even insiders by surprise. Why? Because what the church needed wasn't spectacle. It needed a shepherd. A man who had spent his life with the people. Who knew the struggles of the poor, the weight of leadership, and the complexities of a globalized faith. His experience as prior general, his years in Peru, his quiet but steady presence in Rome, none of it was wasted. It had all been preparation. And the cardinals saw what many are now beginning to see. That Pope Leo XIV is not a man of ambition. He is a man of peace. A man who leads not from above, but from within. And in today's world, that may be the most radical form of leadership of all. There are moments in the life of the Church that speak louder than any homily, louder than any encyclical, louder even than the words of the man chosen to lead it. And that's exactly what happened during the most recent conclave. At number 2, we saw the swift and near-unanimous election of a man whose campaign was never one of words but of witness. A man whose presence, humility, and consistency drew both admiration and trust from every corner of the ecclesial world. As a member of the Congregation for Bishops, Robert Francis Prevost had already earned a quiet reputation, not for politics, not for maneuvering, but for formation. He was known as a man who formed priests not only with intellect, but with heart. He understood the delicate balance between tradition and renewal, between fidelity and adaptation. And because of this, he became a rare bridge respected by those who leaned progressive, and those who remained deeply traditional. What stood out, time and time again, wasn't his ambition. It was his stillness. His ability to listen before speaking. To observe without rushing to judgment. To remain present in the background, offering wisdom without demand. His life became a silent testament to faithfulness, lived not in the spotlight, but on the margins where real transformation often begins. He was never interested in headlines. But his life became a headline nonetheless. And so, the speed of his election wasn't just a procedural detail, it was a statement. A statement that the Church, battered and pulled in many directions, wasn't looking for a strategist, a showman, or a celebrity pope. It was searching for something deeper. A pastor, a father, a man of prayer who had already laid down his life quietly, day by day, in service to God's people. And that brings us to number 1, a moment that broke centuries of precedent and carved a new line in the history of the Catholic Church. With the election of Robert Francis Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, 2 firsts unfolded in a single humble man. He became the first pope ever born in the United States of America. And he became the first Augustinian ever to ascend to the chair of St. Peter. It was a moment heavy with meaning. For the first time, the papacy reflected the growing voice of the American Church, one marked not by power, but by promise. A church that had long matured on the global stage, now offering one of its own as a shepherd to the entire world. Yet, this milestone wasn't about nationality alone. It wasn't about politics or global influence. It was about the quiet culmination of a life rooted in simplicity, service, and spiritual depth. As an Augustinian, Pope Leo XIV carries with him a tradition that is both ancient and quietly enduring. Founded in the 13th century, the Augustinian order has always emphasized the interior life community, study, humility, and the restless search for God. While more visible religious orders have often taken center stage, the Augustinians have remained steady in their witness, quietly forming minds and souls in classrooms, parishes, and missions around the world. His election brought their charism into the spotlight, not for its fame, but for its fidelity. And in many ways, that reflects the very essence of his life. Not built on dramatic gestures, but on quiet perseverance. Not forged in grand cathedrals, but in dusty roads and remote villages. Not aimed at applause, but anchored in love. To some, it may seem symbolic. But symbols matter. Because when the world looked to the balcony and saw a man who had walked with the poor, led without pride, and prayed without needing to be seen, it saw something new. And something very old. A church returning not to the past, but to the heart of its mission. A church led by someone who had never sought to lead. Pope Leo XIV's rise marks not just a new chapter, but a new tone. One of quiet strength, of gentle authority, of global vision grounded in deeply personal faith. In him, the world sees not just a pope but a priest. Not just a theologian but a brother. Not just a headline but a human soul who reminds us that holiness still walks among us, and sometimes it wears the name Father Bob. The election of Pope Leo XIV did more than fill the vacancy of a pontificate, it quietly rewrote the geography of tradition. For over 2,000 years, the successors of Peter had come almost exclusively from Europe, with Rome serving as both the spiritual and cultural heartbeat of Catholic leadership. But with this one decision, the College of Cardinals signaled something far greater than a change in leadership. They signaled a shift in perspective. At number 1, we don't just mark a personal milestone, we mark a historic turning point. The ascension of Robert Francis Prevost shattered expectations and broadened the Church's horizon. No longer tethered solely to the old continent, the papacy now speaks from a global vantage point. In Leo XIV, the Church embraces a new face, one shaped not by ancient European courts, but by the winds of the Americas, by missionary roads in Latin America, and by the quiet chapels of the working-class neighborhoods of Chicago. His election was not simply symbolic, it was seismic. It proclaimed to the world that the center of Catholicism, while still rooted in Rome, now listens with ears attuned to the entire planet. To say he is the first American pope is not just a fact of geography, it's a statement about the Church's future. Born in a land shaped by democratic ideals, by waves of immigration, by vibrant and often conflicting cultures, Pope Leo XIV brings with him a deep awareness of pluralism. He understands what it means to hold space for different voices, to navigate a society marked by both freedom and fragmentation. His formation in the United States, one of the world's most spiritually diverse nations, gave him the tools to lead not just those who agree, but those who seek, those who struggle, and those who have questions without answers. He does not carry this with triumph, but with humility. Because alongside his identity as an American, he also walks in the footsteps of St. Augustine, one of the Church's greatest thinkers, and one of its most restless hearts. As a member of the Augustinian order, Leo XIV brings a spirituality that is at once ancient and deeply needed in modern times. The Augustinian way is not centered on hierarchy or control. It is built on community, on the shared search for truth, on the belief that God speaks most clearly in silence and is found not in dominance, but in love. For him, the heart of leadership is not authority, it is interiority. The call to serve is not a climb, but a descent into the lives of others. He has lived this through decades of religious life, shaped by shared meals, common prayer, quiet contemplation, and joyful service. His vision of the Church does not begin at the top. It begins in the soul. In the daily effort to live with grace, to forgive, to walk humbly. That he is both the first American and the first Augustinian pope is not a coincidence. It is the convergence of two paths. One geographic, the other spiritual. One shaped by the diversity of nations, the other by the depth of inner life. Together, they form a leader uniquely prepared for the world. We now live in a world crying out not for spectacle, but for substance. Not for certainty, but for sincerity. In Pope Leo XIV, the Church hasn't just made history. It has made a statement. A statement that the gospel is still alive, not locked in the past, but growing in new soil. That the voice of Peter can rise from unexpected places. And that the future of Catholicism will be written not only in cathedrals and conclaves, but also in the lives of humble servants who, like this man, said yes without needing to be seen. And so, as the white smoke faded and a humble man stepped forward bearing the name Leo XIV, it became clear to those watching, and to those praying, that something sacred was unfolding. Not just a new chapter, but a new page in the living book of the Church's history. A page not written in ink, but in flesh, in journey, in the quiet unfolding of providence. His election wasn't a product of strategy. It wasn't predicted, nor demanded. It was, in the truest sense, a whisper of the Holy Spirit, a reminder that heaven still speaks through the unexpected. through the gentle, the overlooked, the faithful. With Leo XIV, the Church does not abandon its past. It builds upon it. And in doing so, it takes a breath, looks outward, and begins again. As the bells rang through Rome and the world looked to a new pontiff, what many failed to realize was that something deeper had begun, not merely a change in leadership, but a quiet spiritual reawakening. The figure now known as Pope Leo XIV did not arrive with thunder, nor with sweeping declarations. Instead, he came with stillness. A man formed in silence. A man shaped not by the prestige of institutions, but by the patience of service. And perhaps that is the real message. That the Church, after centuries of navigating grandeur and complexity, is being led once more by someone who understands the value of humility. Not as an aesthetic, but as a way of life. In the days following his election, images circulated. The new pope walking without entourage, stopping to embrace a disabled pilgrim, pausing longer than protocol demands at the tomb of a forgotten saint. Small moments. Unremarkable to some. But to those watching closely, these gestures spoke volumes. They signaled a return to the roots of leadership, a return to Christ-like presence, not just papal power. For many Catholics around the world, especially those who had grown weary of scandals, divisions, and institutional fatigue, this quiet approach came as a balm. It reminded them that the Church is not first a bureaucracy, it is a body. Not first a fortress, but a family. And in Pope Leo XIV, they saw someone who was not rushing to reform with noise, but reforming with gentleness. Someone who would not shout over the chaos of the world, but would kneel beneath it, and lift those crushed by its weight. His previous decades of ministry were already proof of this. He didn't just preach the gospel, he lived it in places where it was hardest to believe. In poor communities where food was scarce but faith was abundant. In dioceses where infrastructure was failing but hope still endured. He didn't go there to fix things, he went to be with people. And in doing so, he built something the world is starving for: trust. And now, that same spirit is guiding his every step. From his first moments as Pope, he made it clear he is not here to be served. He is here to serve. Observers might point to his American background, his Augustinian roots, or his pastoral experience as key elements of his leadership style. And all of those matter. But beneath them is something more essential. His deep conviction that God is found not in dominance, but in accompaniment. That holiness begins not in visibility, but in hiddenness. That the Church, to be strong again, must learn how to be small. It's a paradox. And yet, that paradox is precisely where renewal lives. Because the truth is, the Catholic Church of the 21st century stands at a crossroads. It is no longer the cultural powerhouse it once was in Europe. In some places, it faces ridicule. In others, irrelevance. And yet, in the global south, in Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia, it is growing, breathing, moving. The face of Catholicism is changing. And Pope Leo XIV's election is not just a response to that change, it is a reflection of it. He brings with him the wisdom of a world church. One not locked in marble chambers, but alive in jungle parishes, city slums, and refugee camps. A church where priests walk barefoot through rivers to bring the Eucharist, and grandmothers teach catechism from memory under tin roofs. It is this world, raw, real, and often unseen, that shaped him. And it is this world he now represents. But representation is not enough. Leadership demands discernment. And Pope Leo knows this well. Already, he has begun inviting voices into the conversation that were once kept at a distance. Not to make the Church fashionable, but to make it faithful. Faithful to the cry of the poor. Faithful to the wounds of abuse victims. Faithful to the yearning of young people who are searching for meaning in a world that often feels hollow. His vision is not one of compromise, but of communion. Of gathering what has been scattered. Of healing what has been broken. He knows he cannot do it alone, and he does not pretend to. His speeches, few as they are laced not with personal conviction, but with communal invitation. "Walk with me," he said recently to a crowd in St. Peter's Square. "Not behind me, and not above me, but beside me." That one sentence captured his papacy in essence. It is not about creating a new church, It is about rediscovering the one Christ left us. A church of the Beatitudes. A church of the brokenhearted. A church where the shepherd smells like the sheep, not because he is trying to relate, but because he never left their side. And perhaps this is why people, even those distant from religion, are watching with unexpected interest. They are not seeing a pope trying to impress. They are seeing a man trying to be faithful. And in an era of curated images and rehearsed authenticity, such quiet integrity is a kind of revolution. For the first time in years, lapsed Catholics are stepping back into churches. Not because of theological debates, but because of something they see in this man's eyes, a kind of truth that doesn't demand, but invites. A kind of leadership that doesn't elevate itself, but kneels down to wash feet. This is what makes Pope Leo XIV not only historic but prophetic. Not in the sense of predicting the future, but in the sense of reminding the world of what we've forgotten. That greatness is found in service. That love is expressed in listening. And that the Church's future will not be written by power, but by presence. And so, a new journey begins not just for him, but for all of us. The road ahead is long. There will be opposition. There will be misunderstanding. There will be pain. But if history has taught us anything, it's that the most enduring change often starts with the quietest voice. And now, that voice wears white. And so, as the early days of Pope Leo XIV's pontificate quietly unfold, a different kind of current begins to stir in the Church. Not a storm of controversy, nor a flood of media spectacle, but a gentle movement, like water rising beneath the surface. There is no grand announcement, no sweeping decree, but already hearts are turning. Not because of pressure, but because of presence. Inside the Vatican, small shifts are beginning to appear. Not in structure, but in spirit. The tone of meetings has softened. Conversations that were once guarded are now marked by pauses that invite listening rather than defensiveness. In the Apostolic Palace, aides speak of a pope who begins his mornings not with commands, but with contemplation. He prays long before the city awakens. He walks alone, unguarded, across courtyards where saints once walked. He carries no agenda, but brings a quiet clarity that is slowly redefining the rhythm of the Holy See. Even among the Swiss Guard, who have seen generations of popes come and go, there is talk of something unusual. This one, they say, nods at them not out of formality, but with sincerity. He remembers their names. He asks about their families. And when he blesses them, it's not a gesture, it's a moment. To the casual observer, none of this may seem groundbreaking. But for those within the life of the Church, such subtle changes are seismic. They signal a return to the essence of what leadership should be. Not a display, but a gift. Not a ladder, but a cross. Beyond Vatican walls, the response has been equally profound. In the slums of Manila, in the rural dioceses of Uganda, in the cold cathedrals of Quebec, bishops and laity alike are watching him not for what he will declare, but for how he will live. And that is the paradox of Pope Leo XIV. The world is not waiting for his next move. The world is watching his stillness. Because in that stillness, there is a quiet invitation, a call to slow down, to step back, to remember. To remember what the Church truly is. Not a political machine. Not a relic of a bygone era. But the body of Christ. A living mystery. A place where the sacred touches the suffering, and where the wounded find a home. And this Pope, this man who once walked barefoot into Andean villages with nothing but the Eucharist and a backpack of medical supplies, now walks the halls of the Vatican with the same posture. Not as a ruler, but as a reminder. A reminder that greatness in the Church has always been measured by humility, and that the most powerful voices are often the ones that do not raise themselves. He has no illusion that he will fix everything. He knows the challenges that await him. The growing secularism in the West, the deep wounds of abuse, the sharp divisions within the Church itself. He sees the pressures from political forces, from media, from every corner of ideology. But he does not flinch. Because he has spent his life not solving institutions, but serving souls. And perhaps that is what gives his papacy its quiet strength. He knows that what the Church needs most right now is not control but courage. Not innovation but incarnation. The kind of leadership that bends low to wash feet. The kind of holiness that finds God not in noise, but in neighbor. As he begins this sacred task, he carries with him the invisible weight of 1,000,000,000 hopes. But he also carries something else, something older, something deeper. The presence of a church that has survived storms far greater than these. A church that was born in an upper room, fed in catacombs, and flourished on the blood of martyrs. A church that, despite everything, still believes in resurrection. And now, as Leo XIV takes his place among the long line of shepherds, he does so not as the loudest voice, but perhaps the clearest. Because his message is not wrapped in rhetoric, it is written in his life. A life that has walked through poverty, across continents, into classrooms, and now onto the world stage. But even there, he has not changed. He still walks slowly. He still listens more than he speaks. He still prays with his eyes closed tightly, as if the world might disappear for a moment and leave him alone with God. And that is the kind of man who now wears the white cassock of Peter. He has no empire to build, no legacy to protect, only a church to love, a world to serve, and a Christ to follow. So, as the sun sets over Rome and lights flicker on beneath the dome of St. Peter's, a new chapter continues to be written. Not in ink, but in witness. Not in policy, but in presence. And in the stillness of that moment, something ancient returns to the surface. A hope. A hope that the church is not done. That the gospel is still alive. That holiness is still possible. And that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin not with noise, but with a whisper. And now, as the world exhales and the church finds itself walking forward once more, there stands at her helm a man not crowned in glory, but clothed in grace. Pope Leo XIV does not come to redefine the faith. He comes to remind us of it. Not with fireworks, but with fidelity. Not with sweeping change, but with steadfast love. He is not the thunder, but the echo that follows. Not the flame, but the steady candle that refuses to go out. And perhaps, in an age so loud, that's exactly what we needed. Because the future of the church will not be forged in strategy, but in saints. And while his name may now echo through cathedrals and headlines, he remains what he always was: a servant, a brother, a father. One who has walked beside the poor, listened to the forgotten, and whispered prayers when no one was watching. So let the world look again not at the power, but at the posture. Not at the throne, but at the man who sits upon it. And let them see that even in the heart of Rome, even in this fractured time, God still chooses the humble. A new page has turned. And with it, a quiet light begins to shine again softly, faithfully, and without fear. This is Pope Leo XIV. And this is just the beginning.